I'll make you walk again if you free my father. A 7-year-old girl stood in a packed courtroom and made an impossible promise to the city's most feared judge, a man who hadn't stood in 15 years. The entire room erupted in cruel laughter. But what happened next silenced every single person. This is a story about faith so powerful it defied everything we think we know about reality. If you believe miracles still happen in this world, hit that like button right now and subscribe. Drop a comment telling us, have you ever witnessed something that science couldn't explain? Let's dive into this incredible story. Imagine standing in front of the most powerful person in the room. Someone who holds your entire future in their hands. Someone who's never shown mercy. Never bent the rules. Never believed in anything except cold, hard facts. Now imagine you're 7 years old. That's exactly where Isabella Rivera found herself on a gray Tuesday morning in the city's main courthouse. The courtroom was massive. Tall ceilings. Dark wood panels that made everything feel heavy and serious. Rows of benches packed with people. Lawyers in expensive suits, reporters with cameras and notepads, curious spectators who'd come to watch justice being served. At the front, behind an enormous wooden desk that seemed to touch the ceiling, sat Judge Harrison Stone. 62 years old. Silver hair. Face carved from years of delivering sentences without hesitation. And for the past 15 years, confined to a wheelchair after a devastating car accident that doctors said would never, ever heal. Judge Stone was famous. Or maybe infamous is the better word. People called him the Iron Judge. The man without mercy. Some even whispered he had ice water running through his veins instead of blood. He didn't smile. He didn't joke. He didn't care about your story, your struggles, or your tears. He only cared about the law. And that morning, the law was about to destroy Isabella's family. Her father, Carlos Rivera, sat at the defendant's table. Handcuffs on his wrists. Head bowed. Shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Carlos wasn't a criminal. Not really. He was a father who'd made a desperate choice. His family was starving. His wife was sick. His children needed food. So he'd stolen, taken bread and medicine from a store when he couldn't afford to pay. The store owner pressed charges. The law didn't care about hunger. And now Carlos was facing 10 years in prison. 10 years away from his children. 10 years where Isabella would grow up without her father. She sat in the back row, a tiny figure in a faded blue dress and worn-out sneakers. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her hands were folded in her lap, but they trembled. Judge Stone adjusted his glasses and picked up the sentencing document. His voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. Carlos Rivera, you have been found guilty of theft. The law is clear. Regardless of your circumstances, theft is theft. I hereby sentence you to. Wait! The small voice pierced through the formal atmosphere like a stone through glass. Every head turned. Isabella stood up, her legs shaking but her eyes burning with something fierce and unbreakable. Judge Stone stopped mid-sentence. His eyebrows rose in surprise, then lowered in irritation. Young lady, sit down. This is a court of law, not a playground. But Isabella didn't sit. She took a step forward. Then another. Her worn sneakers squeaked on the polished marble floor as she walked down the center aisle. Please, Your Honor, she said, her voice louder now. Please don't send my father away. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A lawyer in the front row smirked. A reporter leaned forward, sensing a story. Judge Stone's jaw tightened. Child, I understand you're upset. But your father broke the law. Now sit down before I have security remove you. Isabella reached the front of the courtroom. She stood directly before the massive wooden bench, tiny compared to the towering judge in his wheelchair. Her father gasped. Isabella, no. Don't. But she wasn't listening to anyone except the burning conviction in her own heart. She looked up at Judge Stone, tears streaming down her cheeks but her voice steady. I'll make you walk again, Your Honor. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Then the laughter started. It began with a single snort from someone in the back. Then a chuckle from a lawyer. Then full-blown laughter that spread through the courtroom like wildfire. People doubled over. Some slapped their knees. Others wiped tears from their eyes, but these were tears of mockery, not compassion. Did she just say, walk again? Is she serious? Poor thing's lost her mind. An elderly woman in a purple hat shook her head loudly. Someone get that child out of here before she embarrasses herself further. A man in a business suit shouted over the laughter. Yeah, make him dance too, little girl. Maybe he can do a backflip while you're at it. The laughter grew louder. Crueler. Carlos tried to stand, his handcuffs rattling. Isabella, please. Stop this. Don't humiliate yourself for me. Two security guards pushed him back down into his seat, holding his shoulders. Isabella's face flushed red. Her hands clenched into tiny fists at her sides. The weight of their mockery crashed down on her like waves, trying to drown her courage. But she didn't run. She lifted her chin higher and spoke again, louder this time. I'll make you walk again, Your Honor. But only if you free my father. The laughter reached a crescendo. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled frantically. This was too good. Too ridiculous. Too perfect for tomorrow's headlines. Judge Stone gripped the armrests of his wheelchair so tightly his knuckles turned white. 15 years. 15 years he'd lived in this chair. 15 years of specialists telling him the damage was permanent. 15 years of phantom pains, of watching others walk while he rolled. 15 years of burying his bitterness under a mountain of rigid law and merciless judgment. And now this child dared to offer him what no doctor, no surgery, no treatment in the world could give him? He wanted to laugh. He wanted to mock her like everyone else. But something in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't naivety. It wasn't stupidity. It was absolute, unshakable faith. The kind of faith he'd lost decades ago. Judge Stone leaned forward, his face inches from Isabella's. You have 2 minutes, he said, his voice low and dangerous. 2 minutes to show me this impossible miracle. And when you fail, when nothing happens, you'll learn a valuable lesson about the real world. Justice isn't bought with fairy tales and false hope. The laughter died down, replaced by tense whispers. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Isabella took a deep breath. Her small chest rose and fell. Her mother sobbed quietly in the back row. Her father's face was buried in his handcuffed hands. But Isabella only saw one thing, the man in front of her. She moved closer to the wheelchair, her tiny hands trembling as she extended them. It's not a dream, Your Honor, she said softly but clearly. It's a promise. You will walk, and everyone in this room will see it happen. Judge Stone stared down at her, at this impossible, foolish, brave little girl. And for the first time in 15 years, something cracked in the wall he'd built around his heart. The courtroom held its breath. Cameras pointed. Security guards tensed. And Isabella knelt down on the cold marble floor, placing her small hands on Judge Harrison Stone's motionless knees. The room went completely silent, because everyone, even the ones who didn't believe, felt it. Something was about to happen. Something that would shatter everything they thought they knew about what was possible. The cold marble floor bit into Isabella's knees, but she didn't flinch. Her small hands rested gently on Judge Stone's legs that hadn't moved, hadn't felt, hadn't responded to anything for 15 years. She closed her eyes, and she began to pray. Not loudly, not dramatically, just soft, whispered words that only she and perhaps God could hear. Her lips moved quickly, forming sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her 7-year-old voice should reach. The courtroom watched in absolute tension. Some leaned forward, curious despite themselves. Others crossed their arms, waiting for the inevitable failure. A few looked almost sympathetic, as if watching a car crash in slow motion. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. Nothing happened. Judge Stone sat perfectly still, his face a mask of stone. His legs remained motionless, his expression unchanged. Then, from the back of the courtroom, a voice shattered the silence. Come on, miracle worker. We're all waiting. Laughter exploded like a dam breaking. Make him tap dance, someone shouted. Or maybe juggle while he's at it, another voice added. The mockery came in waves, each one crueler than the last. People who minutes ago had been silent spectators were now pointing, laughing, treating this sacred moment like entertainment at a circus. A woman in the third row shook her head loudly. This is pathetic. Someone stop this before the poor child traumatizes herself for life. A lawyer near the front muttered to his colleague, loud enough for others to hear. And they wonder why we don't let children testify. Pure fantasy. The laughter bounced off the marble walls, the high ceiling, the wooden panels. It surrounded Isabella like a cage made of sound, each laugh a bar trapping her in humiliation. Judge Stone watched her. His eyes, cold and analytical, studied every tremor in her hands, every tear forming in her closed eyes. And then he laughed. It was a dry, cruel sound, sharp as a whip crack. Is that all? He said, his voice dripping with contempt. Absolutely pathetic. Nothing happened. Not a twitch. Not a tingle. Nothing. His laughter was permission for everyone else to unleash their mockery without restraint. The courtroom erupted. People weren't just laughing now, they were howling, slapping their knees, wiping tears from their eyes. This was the funniest thing they'd seen in years. A child playing miracle worker in a serious courtroom, promising the impossible and delivering exactly what they expected, nothing. Isabella's eyes opened, and her heart shattered. She looked around the room and saw only faces twisted with laughter, pointing fingers, shaking heads, eyes full of pity and scorn. She'd failed. She'd humiliated herself in front of everyone. And worst of all, she'd humiliated her father. Carlos was sobbing now, his whole body shaking. He tried desperately to stand despite the handcuffs, his voice breaking with anguish. "Stop this. Stop. She's just a child. Leave her alone." But the guards grabbed his shoulders and forced him back down into the chair. One pressed firmly on his back, keeping him in place. "Sit down, Mr. Rivera. Don't make this worse." Isabella stood up slowly. Her legs trembled so badly she nearly fell. Her face was bright red, flushed with shame and tears. The blue dress that had seemed so pretty that morning now felt like a costume in a play where she'd forgotten all her lines. She looked at her father, at his tear-stained face, at the hope that had briefly flickered in his eyes and was now dying like a candle in the wind. "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered, though her voice was lost in the noise. "I'm so sorry." The tears came harder now. Hot. Unstoppable. A reporter in the front row was writing furiously. Tomorrow's headline was already forming in his mind. Child's foolish promise becomes courtroom spectacle. Judge Stone cleared his throat and raised his gavel. Bang! The sharp crack of wood on wood cut through the laughter, restoring a semblance of order. "Enough of this farce," Stone declared, his voice iron hard. "We've wasted enough time on childish fantasies. Let's proceed with what we came here to do. Real justice. Not fairy tales." He picked up the sentencing document again, adjusting his glasses. Isabella turned away, defeated. Her small feet began carrying her toward the back of the courtroom, toward the exit, toward escape from this nightmare. Each step felt like walking through mud. Her vision blurred with tears. She could hear whispers following her. Poor thing. What was she thinking? Someone should have stopped her. Her mother reached out from the back row, arms open to catch her broken daughter. But Isabella couldn't reach her yet. The aisle seemed impossibly long. Behind her, Judge Stone's voice rang out clear and final. "Carlos Rivera, you are hereby sentenced to 10 years in." He stopped. Mid-word. Mid-sentence. Mid-breath. The silence was sudden. Sharp. Wrong somehow. Isabella slowed her steps, sensing something shift in the air. Judge Stone's hand went to his chest. His eyes widened slightly. His jaw tensed. Something was happening inside him. It started as pressure, like the air in the room had suddenly become heavier, denser, pushing down on his lungs. Then came the tingling. Faint at first. So faint he thought he'd imagined it. A whisper of sensation in his right calf. A part of his body he hadn't felt in 15 years. Stone's breathing quickened. His grip on the gavel tightened until his knuckles went white. "No," he whispered to himself. "No, this is impossible." But the tingling grew stronger. Warmth spread through muscles that had been cold and dead for so long he'd forgotten what feeling there was like. It wasn't painful, it was shocking, terrifying, wonderful. His toes moved. Just barely. Just a twitch inside his expensive leather shoe. But they moved. Stone's entire body went rigid. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. The courtroom hadn't noticed yet. They were still murmuring, still settling down from the laughter, still watching Isabella's slow walk of shame toward the exit. But Stone knew. Something impossible was awakening inside him. He tried to speak, to continue the sentence, to maintain control, but his voice failed him. His hand trembled as he gripped the edge of the desk. And then Isabella stopped walking. She stood near the door, her back still to the judge. But slowly, so slowly, she turned around. Her tear-stained face looked directly at him across the length of the courtroom. Their eyes met. And in that instant, Judge Harrison Stone saw something in her gaze that made his blood run cold. She knew. Somehow, impossibly, she knew what was happening to him. A strange, heavy silence descended over the courtroom. Not the silence of mockery or anticipation. Something deeper. Heavier. Even the people who'd been laughing moments ago felt it. An inexplicable tension, like the air before a lightning strike. The tingling in Stone's legs intensified. Both calves now. Then his thighs. Warmth flooding through nerve pathways that had been severed, dead, gone. His breathing became ragged. A reporter in the front row frowned, noticing something was wrong. "Is the judge okay?" Stone tried to wave him off, but his hand shook violently. Isabella took one step back toward the front of the courtroom. Then another. Her voice, small but clear, echoed through the terrible silence. "I told you, Your Honor. You will walk." And Judge Harrison Stone, the man who never believed in anything he couldn't see, touch, or prove, felt his right foot pressed down on the wheelchair's footrest with force he controlled. For the first time in 15 years, his eyes went wide with terror and wonder, because the impossible had just become real. Time seemed to stop. The courtroom, which moments ago had been filled with cruel laughter, was now drowning in absolute silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy on your chest. The kind that makes you afraid to breathe too loudly. Judge Harrison Stone sat frozen in his wheelchair, his face pale as snow. Sweat poured down his temples. His hands gripped the armrests so tightly that his fingers had gone completely white. But it was his eyes that told the real story. They were wide, terrified, filled with something no one had ever seen in the Iron Judge before: vulnerability. Isabella stood in the center aisle, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of every single person in that massive room. Tears still streaked her cheeks, but her expression had changed. No more shame, no more defeat, just quiet, unshakable certainty. Then it happened. A sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. Thud. Metal hitting wood. Everyone's head snapped toward the judge's bench. Stone's right foot had moved. Not a twitch. Not a spasm. A deliberate, forceful movement that struck the base of his wheelchair. A woman in the third row gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Did you see that?" a reporter whispered, his camera already rising. "No," someone else breathed. "No, that's impossible." But they all saw it. The whole room saw it. Judge Stone's leg, the leg that hadn't moved in 15 years, had just responded. Stone's breath came in short, desperate gasps. He stared down at his own body like it belonged to a stranger. His mind screamed that this couldn't be real, couldn't be happening, had to be some kind of hallucination. But his body knew the truth. The warmth was spreading. Through his calves, his thighs, down to his feet. Muscles that had atrophied, nerves that had been severed, all somehow awakening like flowers opening to the sun. He tried to speak but couldn't form words. His throat had locked completely. Isabella took another step closer. "I told you, sir," she said softly, her child's voice somehow filling every corner of that enormous room. "You can still walk." And then, before anyone could process what they were seeing, Judge Harrison Stone did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He began to stand. The entire courtroom rose to their feet as one, not by choice but by instinct, like witnesses to something sacred they didn't fully understand. The wheelchair creaked as Stone gripped the armrests with trembling hands. His arms shook with effort. His face twisted with concentration and fear and hope all mixed together. Inch by painful inch, he raised himself. The metallic groan of the wheelchair echoed like thunder in the silence. Cameras flashed in rapid succession. Click, 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 capturing every impossible moment. Lawyers stood with mouths hanging open. Reporters forgot to write. Security guards froze mid-step. Even the ones who'd mocked Isabella just minutes ago now watched with tears forming in their eyes. Because they weren't just watching a man stand up. They were watching a miracle unfold in real time. Stone's legs trembled violently beneath him. For a terrifying moment, it looked like he would collapse. His knees buckled slightly and several people gasped. But he didn't fall. With a final, tremendous effort, Judge Harrison Stone straightened fully. He stood, on his own 2 feet, supporting his own weight. After 15 years in darkness, he was standing in the light. The silence shattered. Someone screamed, a sound of pure shock and joy. Then someone else. Then the entire courtroom erupted in a chaos of gasps, sobs, and stunned exclamations. "Oh my God! He's standing! This can't be real. I'm watching it and I still don't believe it." Stone looked down at his own legs, at his feet planted firmly on the ground. Tears streamed freely down his weathered face. Tears he would never have allowed in public before this moment. 15 years, he whispered, his voice breaking. 15 years. His hands left the armrests. He stood on his own, unsupported. And then, with the whole world watching, Judge Harrison Stone took his first step. Then a second. Then a third. He walked. Slowly, shakily, like a newborn learning how legs work. But he walked. The courtroom absolutely exploded. People weren't just crying now, they were weeping openly. Strangers hugged strangers. The elderly woman who'd mocked Isabella earlier collapsed into her seat, sobbing into her hands. The man who'd told Isabella to make the judge dance was on his knees, face buried in his palms. Reporters abandoned all pretense of professional objectivity, crying while they recorded. One threw down his notepad entirely, unable to write through his tears. Even the security guards, trained to remain stoic, stood with tears running down their faces. Carlos Rivera, still handcuffed at the defendant's table, let out a cry of pure relief and joy. His whole body shook with sobs as he watched the impossible unfold before him. And in the center of it all stood Isabella. Small, quiet, her worn blue dress and scuffed sneakers unchanged. But her eyes held the wisdom of someone who'd always known this would happen. Judge Stone took another step, then another. He walked slowly toward Isabella, his legs growing steadier with each movement, as if remembering what they'd forgotten. When he reached her, he stopped. This powerful man, this symbol of merciless justice, looked down at the 7-year-old girl who had given him back what 15 years of medicine couldn't. "How?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "How did you know?" Isabella looked up at him with those impossibly wise eyes. "I didn't know, Your Honor," she said simply. "I just believed. Faith doesn't need proof, it creates it." Stone fell to his knees before her. Not in his wheelchair, but on the knees that now worked, that now felt, that now obeyed his commands. And this man who had shown no mercy for decades broke down completely. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry. For my hardness. For my cruelty. For almost destroying your family over bread and medicine when I myself was dying inside and didn't even know it." Isabella placed her small hand on his shoulder. "You're forgiven, sir. Everyone deserves a second chance." Stone looked up at her through his tears, then turned his head toward Carlos, still handcuffed at the defendant's bench. The judge stood again, steadier now, stronger, and walked toward the defendant's table. Every eye in the courtroom followed him. He reached Carlos and, with his own hands that could now move with purpose, removed a key from the bailiff's belt and unlocked the handcuffs. They fell to the floor with a metallic clatter that echoed like freedom itself. "Carlos Rivera," Judge Stone said, his voice carrying the weight of true authority for the first time in years. "Not the authority of power, but of humility. You are free of all charges. This court recognizes that sometimes the law and justice are not the same thing. And today, a child taught me what 15 years of sitting in judgment never could." He turned to face the entire courtroom, tears still streaming down his face, but his voice strong and clear. "Let this trial be remembered not as just another case," he declared, "but as the day justice found truth in a child's heart. The day we learned that mercy is greater than law. That faith can accomplish what science cannot. That miracles still happen when we have the courage to believe." The courtroom erupted in thunderous applause. Not the polite clapping of a formal proceeding, but genuine, overwhelming, joyful noise. People stood on benches. They cheered. They cried. They held each other. The rigid protocol of the courtroom shattered completely as humanity flooded back in. Carlos fell to his knees, and Isabella ran to him. Father and daughter collided in an embrace so powerful it seemed to contain all the fear, all the hope, all the love that had built up over months of uncertainty. "My brave girl," Carlos sobbed into her hair. "My incredible, brave girl." Isabella's mother rushed from the back row, and the three of them held each other, an island of family in a sea of witnesses to the impossible. Judge Stone stood watching them, and for the first time in 15 years, maybe for the first time in his entire adult life, he smiled. A real smile. Not practiced. Not professional. Just pure, genuine joy. He took another step. Then another. Walking around his courtroom like a man reborn. The reporters rushed forward, microphones extended, cameras flashing. "Judge Stone, how does it feel? What do you say to the skeptics? Do you believe in miracles now?" Stone raised his hand for silence. The room quieted, though the energy still crackled in the air. "I spent 15 years believing in nothing but what I could see and prove," he said slowly, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I let bitterness turn me into stone, not just my name, but my heart. I thought justice was about rules and punishment." He looked at Isabella, who still stood beside her father. "But this child showed me that real justice requires faith. Real strength is found in mercy. And sometimes the most powerful truth comes from the smallest voice." He paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. My body was healed today. But more importantly, so was my soul. The courtroom erupted in applause once again. 6 months later, the same courtroom looked different somehow. Maybe it was the light coming through the windows. Maybe it was the people smiling instead of scowling. Or maybe it was Judge Harrison Stone, standing behind his bench, actually standing, as he delivered a verdict in a case remarkably similar to Carlos Rivera's. The defendant is sentenced to community service and mandatory job training, he declared. This court recognizes that desperate circumstances require compassionate solutions. Case dismissed. The defendant, a young mother who'd stolen food for her children, burst into tears of relief. In the gallery, Carlos Rivera sat with his arm around Isabella. He had a new job now, one Judge Stone had personally helped him find. His family was whole again. Isabella watched the judge with quiet pride. Since that day, 23 prisoners had been given second chances instead of lengthy sentences. The courtroom that once echoed with harsh judgments now resonated with mercy. After the session, Stone approached them in the hallway. "Isabella," he said warmly. "How's school?" "Good, sir," she smiled. "We're learning about miracles in Sunday school." Stone laughed, a sound that still surprised people who'd known him before. "I imagine you could teach that class yourself." "Maybe," Isabella said thoughtfully. "But I think the best miracles are the ones that change what's inside people, not just what's outside." Judge Harrison Stone knelt down, still marveling that he could, and looked her in the eyes. "You're absolutely right. Thank you, Isabella, for giving me back my legs. But thank you even more for giving me back my heart." He stood and walked away down the courthouse hallway, his steps steady and sure. Isabella watched him go, then looked up at her father. "Papa, do you think other people can have miracles too?" Carlos squeezed her shoulder gently. "Sweetheart, I think miracles happen every day. Most people just forget to believe in them." Isabella smiled and took her father's hand. And as they walked out of the courthouse together, free, whole, and filled with hope, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, painting everything in gold. Because sometimes the most impossible things are just faith waiting to be proven right. And sometimes a 7-year-old girl in a faded blue dress can change the world simply by refusing to stop believing. If this story moved your heart, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories of faith, courage, and miracles. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that impossible is just another word for hasn't happened yet. Drop a comment telling us, what miracle are you believing for in your own life? Let's fill the comments with hope. Remember, the smallest voice can speak the biggest truth. The weakest hands can move the strongest mountains. And faith doesn't need permission to perform miracles. It just needs someone brave enough to believe. See you in the next story. Keep believing in the impossible.